I was speaking to North Star, who are another sponsor of ours.
Yep.
Who do basically democratize the price of data for brands, because obviously usually access to Nielsen and all that's abhorrently expensive. And we had a chat with one of the buyers at Co-op, and what he was saying is, on paper it sounds great. Look, we're going to give you an extra 200, 300, 400, 500 stores.
Right.
But then a lot of the founders are like, amazing.
Yeah, let's do it.
Do the fucking celebration outside Tesco, the Star Jump, whatever.
Exactly.
But then Kieran's like, how do you fund that?
Yeah.
And I think there's a misconception is like, okay, actually, if you've got to not only, it's not just about giving you the stores. Do you have the money to then fund and or the cash to then fund that? You know what I mean? It's like it's a virtuous. Well, they do say cash is king, don't they? But like,
No, and I think it's super real, right? I mean, we meet so many brands that are struggling with it every day, right? I think it's this, and the ones that crack it, those are the ones that can do really well, and the ones that don't are the ones that you sort of fail to see again.
Yeah,
unfortunately, to a large extent.
Yeah. It's just what are the brands that like? What's the hardest bit, do you think, to understand from their perspective?
Well, I think I think many are aware of the problem. I think it's, however, pretty theoretical until you're actually experiencing it, and like how urgent it gets when you're getting that order. Like many brands, especially as they sort of grow up a little bit, they do sort of cash flow forecasting and planning, and you sort of look at, how much revenue am I expected to get in, and sort of you do the budget, and obviously how much are you going to spend when. Yeah. And to some extent, you sort of feel like
storage. Sorry. Yeah.
You feel like you're a little bit in control.
Yeah.
But when suddenly things change, whether it's a customer paying you late or you get this order that you want to fulfill, that's when things get pretty tough. And most sort of options that you then sit with are pretty hard to get by in a short space of time, right? So you would sort of, obviously if you want to go out and raise capital from angel investors or whatever it might be, which is usually like the first step that many need to take to get sort of from 0 to 1. That's not something that you do in like a week's time, when you're sort of waiting with that email order from this large grocer saying, like, now we want to put your products across 100 stores. You can't then pull that together in like a week's time. So you need to figure out, you need to plan ahead. And that's the hard
and also that's the other thing, and that's one thing I want to talk about today, is like, you've obviously been on both sides of this situation, but it's like how brands can raise money. Yeah. Because there's like, in terms of the VC stuff, or not even just just raising money. Yeah. It's the enigma wrapped in the riddle, smothered in the headache, as they call it. Like, it's really hard. Yeah. But there's an issue with that as well, because I've had friends who are raising money for their brands, but again, that cash, that they were sort of hoping that cash would be in say, for example, I'm just putting these dates out my arse here, but like say Jan, doesn't come in until June. Right. So what happens in that 6-month period? Right. And it's like it's more than squeaky bum time. It's like hanging on by the edge of your seats time. Yeah. Because I think also raising money is a real art. Like, I do think there's a lot of people. I think if you draw it back to first principles, right? I think you've got to have a really good product. Sure. And demonstrably different. But I think that's it. You got to try and be a category of one, in the sense of like, what do you add incrementally to a category? Sure. Got to be good, driven founders, and then I think having a pretty good brand as well, or packaging. Yeah. But I think there's a lot of brands who have those three things, but don't get escape velocity because they don't know the art of raising. Exactly. Maybe we can start there. I mean, this is going to go all over, man. This is a super chill, chill, relaxed, ebbing and flowing conversation. Love that. But yeah, because I think you've been both sides of the coin, right? Yes. From your side, what have you learned about the art of raising money? But then I think before we sort of swim into that, like, what were you doing? What preceded all of this? What preceded? Preceded Mimo.
So if I start there,
then we'll go into like how brands, the art of raising money. Yeah, exactly. It is an art. Yeah.
It is an art. Now, so proceeding to Mimo. So I'm Swedish. I've sort of grown up through the the Stockholm tech ecosystem, really. So I started at this payments company, iZettle.
Yeah.
You've seen across like bars and pubs.
I used to use
cafes.
it. Yeah.
And
is that a Swedish company?
That's a Swedish business. So I was there in 2012.
Yeah.
When they were sort of 30 people in an attic. And I was really impressed by how big of an impact that company could have. So already then they were sort of going viral with their sort of payment card acceptance machines through their phone.
Yeah.
And I was really impressed by how technology could sort of help you have a really big impact. I was super young. Most of the team was really young. But we hustled and got a lot of shit done using technology. And so I got into that ecosystem there. Sort of was with Spotify in the growth team in 2013 and 14. So I was early in the sort of payments and technology ecosystem. And then sort of through that ended up in venture capital, so in investing. And with that experience, essentially looked at a bunch of different kinds of businesses, different kinds of business models, learned a lot in terms of, in particular through induction, by sort of hanging out and spending time with lots of great founders, sort of learn through induction how they behave and what they do, both in terms of obviously the businesses they build, but also the teams they build. And that was sort of the time, that's when I moved over to London. I spent more time over here and sort of learned even more about the sort of both payments, but also sort of cash flow management ecosystem for both food and bev brands and FMCG brands, but also other types of businesses. And sort of throughout that journey started to form this idea of what would later become sort of Mimo. And but the trigger point for Mimo, having sort of been an investor for 5 years, I was at home. At the time, we had one kid, and my wife was running the finances for her dad's construction business. And she was essentially experiencing sort of two key things. She was experiencing this fact that lots of the processing of payments and invoices and keeping track of who's paid you and not and chasing customers. She was doing all of that manually in a spreadsheet, right? And she was also paying like international suppliers with complex IBAN sort of codes and everything. Took lots of her time. She was doing this in the evenings. So we sort of put the kids to bed. She'd had her full day job and she was sort of running this thing for her dad's construction business in the evenings. Spending lots of time on admin. But then the second point was that she was always sort of turning every coin from a cash flow perspective. So they were essentially having to pay for these sort of construction projects, put out cash first, and then wait to hopefully get paid by these customers. And so they really struggled from a cash flow perspective. And throughout my time as an investor, I'd essentially seen how, we were using technology across different industries, whether it's e-commerce or SaaS, especially digital industries, had seen lots of innovation in how you manage these payments and automate payment flows and sort of automate cash flow forecasting and cash flow access. But traditional industries like construction and sort of some of the companies that we started working with Mimo in food and beverage and FMCG, we're still very much running this sort of fully manually. And so that's essentially the sort of brainchild of Mimo, where we started to essentially help to automate more of the payments processes and then provide access to working capital and cash flow. So you could essentially spend less time on that and more time on running the business.
Yeah, the cash flow thing's the biggest. Well, as they say, cash is king. That's like the thing that was drilled into me when I was at Manilife. I want to go back to the Swedish, because you said iZettle and Spotify in that early period.
Yeah.
The one thing that fascinates me is sort of different cultures and how sort of almost like pockets in the world that are like do specific things really well. So obviously, like, sort of Silicon Valley for a lot of the big tech firms. I suppose. I think, what do they say? If you're an American, you go to New York if you want to be in finance. Washington if you want to be in politics. LA if you want to be in the music industry or acting. Why I quite like London is you just go to London. It's a hodgepodge of all those things.
Right.
But actually, that's maybe a bit cruel because I think I don't know what you'd call them, all these pockets of like innovation, like Manchester, for example, with music.
Yep.
The Oasis, Joy Division, the Smiths.
Yeah.
The Stone Roses, and it's almost that kind of osmosis of ideas that happen in these small cities.
Yeah.
Obviously, is it Daniel Elk or Daniel Eck?
Eck.
Spotify geezer. he was based in Stockholm, right?
Yep.
What is it about, why Stockholm? What's in the Swedish DNA that makes places like iZettle in this city work towards tech? What would you say that is?
I think it's there's a few things. I think for all of this, I think it holds that there's usually a few components that come together, right? I think to one extent, I think you always have these role models sort of springing out of an ecosystem that sort of pulls people ahead, right? Whether it's sort of in Stockholm, there was a few early wins with Skype, for example, was like an early company that
was that from
that also grew really big.
From Stockholm.
That's also from Stockholm.
Wow.
And so I think you have these sort of role models that have sort of shown that it's possible to build something big, whether it's in tech or whether it's in, a band out of Manchester, sort of showing and leading the way of sort of, hey, this is how you actually get it done.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one piece of it, and that there was always, like when Daniel was young, he was part of sort of Daniel Ek. I obviously don't know his story fully, but I know that there's been these, they call them mafias, tech mafias almost, right? That they've sort of been part of small groups of people that have sort of shown each other what's possible.
Yeah, that's like the PayPal mafia with Elon,
exactly.
Peter Thiel.
Exactly.
I don't know who the other guy was. There's a bunch of them. That fucking caned it. Yeah, yes. Interesting.
So I think role models is one thing. I think the other one is then talent density. So I think in Stockholm in particular, you have lots of great schools for tech. You have lots of sort of people who have been in these companies and sort of learned. Like we've hired a bunch of people from Klarna and from iZettle who have sort of payments and finance experience to build like some of the core infrastructure at Mimo.
Yeah.
So I think the talent density is also a big thing. And then finally, I think it's sort of about funding. I think lots of these companies, obviously less so probably for a band, but I think you have the same here with the sort of F&B ecosystem that we've gotten to know really well, that there's this sort of community that sort of help each other understand how to go from 0 to 1, both in terms of building a company and getting funding.
Yeah.
And I think you sort of put all these things together.
It's the ships or the boats rise with the tide.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, and that's why I've interviewed some founders from like Melbourne, and a lot of people look at challenger food and drink brands, look at the UK specifically with massive reverence, in the sense that like people, that's why it kind of doesn't wind me up when people are like, oh, it's so hard right now. It's like in London and the UK, we have the best grocery system in the world. It's like so easy, like you get one listing and like you get that listing. You're not going through fucking wholesalers, you're not going through all these other things. Point one. Point two, if you get a list, if you knock on Sainsbury's doors and they say no, you can knock on Morrison's doors, Asda's doors. Like it's much easier to get into places. It's not a yes. In Australia, it's Coles and Woolworths. It's binary. It's a duopoly. It's two stores.
Exactly.
And then also it's like, do you know, it's a bit, again, I suppose one of the things today is linking sort of lessons from Silicon Valley, building tech and applying that to food and drink brands. I love that cross section.
Yes.
But it is almost like London is almost the Silicon Valley for challenger food and drink brands.
Yeah.
Because there's this melting pot, there's this osmosis, there's this networking events. Like we do events with this, and it's like loads of people coming in.
Yeah.
So it's almost like that what was happening almost in fintech in Sweden then.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that. And I think there's a lot about that sort of appreciation and sort of culture around sort of taking those small things and making them big. I was speaking to a spirits founder last week that we work with, and we were sort of talking about different dynamics across different markets. And he was sort of describing how he sort of sees the challenge of going into the Italian market, for example, where like Bacardi is the big distributed brand that everyone wants to sort of work with. It's really hard.
It's called Bacardi.
Bacardi is the owner company, right?
Sorry. I thought that was like some bougie. Sorry, mate. Yeah.
And they don't have the same culture. Whereas here, obviously, there's this sort of lots of sprouts of new brands popping up.
Yeah.
People are keen on trying new things. So I do definitely think that like that culture helps the brands that we're working with today to sort of get that first little sort of foot in the door by there's being in this culture of people wanting to try. And obviously that's like a self-fulfilling sort of thing, right? Where if the market wants to try new things, then there's more new things popping up that get traction, and then therefore there's more supply. So I think the sort of supply and demand there plays together in sort of creating these environments. So
it's interesting because it's like we get all the inspiration from New York, and LA, that Expo West show.
Yep.
But because I suppose this is another thing is, I was speaking to someone the other day about this, and I want to explore this with you, mate. It's like, say you've got America here, UK here, Europe here, right? Then the East here. But it's like we get all these ideas, almost we're the first, you cross the fucking channel, or you cross the sea, or the ocean, I should say.
Right.
And it's us. So we get all those ideas, but then it's a much easier market, albeit way smaller, but a much easier market to activate in the sense that, you know, you go into America, it's each state is wildly different. Each state's like its own country.
Yes.
I think, you know, I spoke to the guy who does Vita Coco, and the way they've got one guy who kind of runs the New York place, and it's all like literally the guy who's the head of New York as a New York state. He still runs it proper gangster style, like his boxes coming out of cars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So then when you come to London, actually all the infrastructure to launch a brand is still bloody hard, but it's much easier than, say, you know, over there.
Yeah.
So you've worked in New York as well, right? Have you worked in New York?
I did spend some time with Spotify in New York, yes.
Yes, okay. So I'd love to know, going back, I just really want to sort of sink deep into the way, you know, the Swedes view building things. Yeah. I think it's interesting. So I think New York is interesting because it's like a melting pot of like it's basically where every type A personality person goes in the world.
Right.
It's nuts, but I'm sure there's loads there. I think London, it's probably... kind of has a lot of that, but it's probably slightly toned down a little notch. We like a drink. What's it like in Sweden from your perspective, in Stockholm, in terms of those two things?
It's a good question. Look, I think generally Sweden is a pretty, like, there's a few things that probably sort of exemplifies well what Sweden is like.
Yeah.
I think we have this concept of, let me see if I can find the words. I think there's a few things. So first of all, we have this concept of what we call Jante, which is essentially this idea that you're not special and you shouldn't believe that you're special. You're not. So you as a person...
as in the Swedish...
Yeah, the Swedish word is called Jante.
Yeah, okay.
And the concept is essentially, don't think that you're anything special. You're just like anyone else. And that's the sort of socialist background that we come from.
Yeah.
I think that puts this sort of, a little bit of low ego personality in lots of people in Sweden. That you don't necessarily think that you're special. And so you have a lot less of what you would have in New York, where sort of from a, you know, if I meet sort of salespeople out of the US, they're obviously a lot more bombastic than what you would find with a sort of Swedish salesperson. So I think that puts this layer of sort of having a low ego and sort of playing for the team. Across most things that we do. I think the other thing is that we're sort of coming from pretty socialist background and therefore pretty consensus driven in many decisions that we're doing, which is sort of a good and a bad. But I think what it leads to in company building is pretty flat organizations. And so what that means is that we can keep, so actually when we started building Mimo, we were very proactively sort of hiring people that were relatively experienced in what they were doing, but were not particularly keen on being a manager, but actually just wanted to get shit done. And I think there's this sort of, I don't think it's super different necessarily to what you would have here in London, but I do think that this sort of Jante idea of you not being special, plus the sort of consensus-driven, let's work as a team in decision-making, creates a pretty strong foundation for having a sort of team just run really quickly and in one specific direction.
It's interesting. So I think the whole idea of a flat hierarchy, like, seems really like is a great place to aim for. But I think, as you were saying, mate, in terms of culturally socialist country, that phrase of you're not better than anyone else, I think culturally for you guys it's much easier to actually embody that flat hierarchy.
Indeed.
Right?
Indeed.
Because I think maybe here we're so used to sort of top down industrial revolution.
Exactly.
You know, we basically created industrial revolution, which is input versus output. There is a manager, there's lines, bang, 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 bang.
Yes.
It's much harder for us. You can't, culture and history is inextricably intertwined into who you are. So you can't just, as much as the Swede model's lovely, you're not just be able to do that. And then on the other side, the States, you know, Model T, Ford, tech, all that stuff. So it's just, that's what I was really understanding, the sort of the nuance of the cultures.
Yeah.
It makes total sense. In terms of Okay, so with that phrase, which is don't be above your sort of station, don't think you're perfect. Does that quell ambition, or how does someone be ambitious in that culture?
So I think we've sort of come to, I think there's still an overarching, if you look at Sweden as a whole, that sort of culture is still very much there. But I do think in certain pockets, and I think especially within sort of maybe our pocket where we are at, there's a lot more, like that's almost like a trend that's moving, that's getting pushed out because of inspiration from other markets like the tech ecosystem in the US or the sort of financial ecosystem you have here, or sort of high sort of professional sort of organizations in other countries.
Yeah.
So I think if I'm looking at, our team, I wouldn't say that it's full of people with a Jante mindset. I'd rather say that it's sort of an old tradition that I think overarchingly puts this idea of, hey, let's work as a team to push hard towards something together. But I wouldn't say that it's sort of holding ambition back. I think rather that's where role models come in, where I think it's sort of being able to see that across the street, there's this other company that has sort of taken something out of nothing and built like iZettle that sort of was literally 30 people when I was there, young people running around, not a lot of structure, but then a few years later sold for $2 billion to PayPal. That's pretty inspirational. I think being able to see that nearby is something that I think then sort of turns this culture a little bit on its head.
Yes, interesting. I want to get into the iZettle and Spotify. There's a guy I interviewed, James Smith. Do you know the podcast Chris Williamson? Don't know if you've ever come across that.
No, sorry.
Anyway, a big podcast to hear. And we're actually going to one of his shoots after this. Actually, he's based in America. I've been on Rogan and stuff, but he's from Newcastle in the UK.
Right.
Luke, the other founder, is based in the UK.
Right.
And then James is based in Australia. And we were just again talking about the different cultures and different ambitions. And what James was saying is, in the UK, the funniest guy or girl is probably working in the office or a factory, and is down the pub on a Friday is making you belly laugh.
Right.
In America, that person is probably a stand-up comedian.
Right.
And it's like our culture of tall poppy syndrome, like don't get above your station, And then whereas in America, it's like go for it, man. It's super interesting. That. I love exploring those things.
Yeah, indeed.
So with iZettle, take me to the attic. Like, what did that smell like? What did that feel like? Try and paint the picture of that, because I'd love people listening to this, that 0 to 1 Trough of Sorrows. Paul Graham talks about it. I love that bit. It's fucking hard. But there's a lot in that. Talk to me about that. What did you learn from that experience?
Look, I think you'd probably see a very similar dynamic in many. Like I see the similar dynamic whenever I'm meeting many of our early stage sort of F&B brands that we're working with in their co-working spaces or in their offices, right?
Yeah.
You'll see the same type of vibe. There's essentially a bunch of sort of 20 to 30, maybe 35-year-olds that are sort of running very hard, not necessarily always knowing where they're going, but sort of running really hard towards this sort of idea of making something big. And, day to day, just bumping into a bunch of shit and realizing that, this thing doesn't work or that thing broke. And sort of we don't necessarily know how to find customer X and solve problem Y. But I think the cool thing that sort of was a jolt to my chest, I'd been in a few banks sort of before that, which was terrible to work in. And I sort of came into this office and it was full of these 20 to 35-year-old people that I think the commonality was that they were sort of really mission driven. There was this very clear mission that iZettle was sort of hammering every day that everyone bought into. And then two, sort of probably not realizing like how long the journey would be to actually get to that mission. But sort of thirdly, just saying, well, fuck it, let's just go and sort of try to figure out the best way every day. And I think that's what inspires me nowadays, whether I'm meeting customers, sort of seeing how they're trying to figure out the next step of their journey, or it's us building Mimo. It's this sort of high-paced energy of trying to have this long sort of mission-driven goal that you're working towards, and then just step by step trying to get there.
There's a quote by Rumi, which I'm going to butcher here, but it's like, when you walk the path will reveal itself.
Right.
And I love that in the sense it's like, driving hard at something you don't know where it's going to go.
Yep.
Which is essentially what we've done with this.
Indeed.
It's like you're just going fucking hard and then
Indeed.
You'll skid around and whatever. But I think you have to do the walk for the path to reveal itself. It's
exactly.
Interesting. What was different about iZettle then? Because I love the commonalities of like young people, grafting, mission. But there's a lot of those companies that bomb, a lot of those companies that go to the ashes, a lot of those companies that don't make it past 0 to 1. What was different about your time at iZettle? Why do you think they sold for 2 billion?
Well, I think there's so many nuances that it's sort of hard to nail down and pin down to one thing. So I think I obviously wasn't there for the full journey, and I think there's sort of the founder, Jacob, has had sort of multiple talks where he talks about how close it was to actually not making it at all in certain situations.
Yeah.
So I think all companies have those sort of near-death experiences, and they definitely had them too. And I'm not sure whether there's sort of one particular thing.
Yeah.
I think, however, there's like usually I'd say also like looking at many of the brands that we're working with, and maybe the ones that, there are certain ones that sort of do take off and other ones that don't. I think in the end, for most, it's sort of this, it is coming down to the customer and being able to solve like a real deep pain point that someone actually really cares about, or finding a niche that no one's actually really sort of served well, but there is real demand there. And that to me is like, there's so many other things around building a company, like finding that first funding round to be able to serve your first sort of large order. Or sort of finding that sort of ops person that's going to be able to help you actually fulfill all those orders, or, hiring that salesperson that unlocks something. Lots of those steps are obviously must-haves, but I think in the end, what it usually boils down to is just if you have enough pull on what you're doing, most things sort of work themselves out.
Customer obsessive.
Customer pull.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I did an interview. Have you been to the Devonshire since you've been over here?
No.
So like, it's this. I wouldn't say it's a new pub now, but I did a shoot there on Friday.
Right.
With Rory Sutherland and Oshin, the founder. And it was like 3 hours, 2.5 hours. It was great.
Nice. Yeah.
And again, I love cross-category learnings, but they were saying, is essentially with a pub, whether you're selling payment systems like iZettle or music streaming with Spotify, or pulling pints of Guinness at the Devonshire.
Yeah.
What we were kind of saying is it's a complete maniacal, fastidious obsession with the customer.
Yeah.
And I think what you've said there about iZettle is interesting, because I think you can get so bogged down into I think we've started celebrating how much money people have raised.
Yeah.
Which is kind of mad.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. And I think obviously for whoever does that and is able to sort of go through the hard work that's always comes with sort of a fundraise, and you should celebrate that, but in the end, like, it's just a means to an end, right? And I think what the great companies, whether it's iZettle or some of the customers that we're working with, what they've been able to crack is finding that product that solves a real problem that people actually care about. And I think that's obviously also, the thing that, in certain food and bev categories, some people are struggling with, in that it's hard to stand out, whether it's from a brand perspective or positioning perspective or taste or whatever it might be. And so I do think that it's sort of, that's usually, you can sort of boil it down to the product, but I'd almost say that it's bigger than that. It's not necessarily only the product, it's sort of actually solving something that people care about. And obviously, sort of standing out for many is hard.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because, again, I interviewed Mark Palmer the other week, who's sort of a food and drink legend, really. He did marketing director at Green and Blacks.
Yeah.
Now does Corson Press. On the board at Nando. Like, he's got his mitts in a lot of different pies.
Yeah.
And he was saying, and I love first principles, right? So if you boil back, he goes, you can, and this goes back to customer obsession almost, is, he goes, I would rather have a bad brand with a great product versus a great brand, i.e. packaging, tone of voice,
Yep.
and a mediocre product.
Yep.
And I think so many people who set up a brand, they want to build a brand
Yeah.
because a brand's cool, and there's a lot of creative agency, and
Yes.
it's kind of boundless what you can do creatively.
Yep.
But if you've got a mediocre product, it's never going to get that second, third, fourth, fifth repeat
Agreed.
purchase. And Mark was like, I'd rather have a product that's so good and it's actually much easier to build a brand.
Yep.
And I think that goes back to like what makes it, what the brands that make it, whether it's in tech or food, is
100%.
how good's that product and does that actually serve a need?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's sort of, I mean, I don't want to be hard. I do think that brand really matters. I don't want to be sort of harsh and arrogant to anyone who works in brand, but like solving the customer need is definitely higher importance. And I would argue also the harder piece.
How so? Why is it harder in your eyes?
I think it's easier, I would argue, to map out like opportunities and sort of white spaces potentially from a brand positioning perspective than actually finding the nuance in a product. If it's a food product, finding the nuance that's actually differentiated that people love. I think that is a thing there's more art than science to that, in my view. And I think brand is something that you can, to your point, develop and grow and refine over time, but the product needs to stick the first time a customer tries your product.
So when you said it's more art finding the customer piece and the brand piece, I think it's so the common misconception is most people think like that bit is the science and the brandy bit's the art.
Right.
I think you're so right, because it's not all of it is customer feedback and customer data. Like that doesn't tell you everything.
No, right.
And I listened to a great podcast the other week with Rick Rubin, and the guy he had on, he built MTV, and then his whole thing was maths and magic.
Right.
And I loved it because he was saying you need magic to build a brand, but you actually need maths. And because I was kind of ardently against data, and that's one thing I've radically changed my mind on. But he was saying, no, and this is the nuance, because you look at all the data, right? You're still making a gut decision.
Yeah.
It's just that gut decision is better than if you don't have that data.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, going back to this, you could call it product market fit, customer obsession, that's the art of it. It's like looking at the data of, say, you've got 4 different products, which is the one that people like. Some may say we're doing an ice cream, like you've got to have your vanilla, right? But then you may have a weird kind of chocolate and hibiscus flavor, which on the ratings, on that data with the maths is like people are like, it's okay, but then you still got to make the gut decision and be like, actually, we're going to back that horse.
Yeah.
And I think you're so right, Henrik, in terms of it's an art.
Yeah, it is an art, and I think a lot of it comes down to knowing what data matters and what data you don't have, right? So I think there's always this, like, for instance, like we're getting lots of product feedback on our product, and we've had that since day one. Like we've very actively worked super closely with many of our customers to understand what they like and not, and sort of how we refine the product. But I think you also have this notion that I think it's the Steve Jobs quote, right? And that people won't tell you what they need because they don't know necessarily. And I think that's the sort of other aspect of data. You need to understand, obviously, both what data you have and how you should interpret that. You should also probably have an intuition around what data you don't have, because not everyone will give you exactly the right feedback on this is the flavor that you should add if they don't know, right? So I think that's the balance should collect data. I'm convinced you should collect data as much as possible on to what extent people are liking your product and appreciating your product, buying more or less. You need that data to be informed, but you should also be mindful of and know what data you should care about and not, so you can sort of act accordingly. And that's the art piece, I think.
Yeah. It's almost like, Little Moon's, the mochi ice cream.
Yeah.
It's like if you'd looked at the data at that pre them going live and becoming massive,
right?
The data would probably say, just go into a format that's like a standard ice cream and do like a Japanese ice cream with matcha. Like I think that's a darling example of the consumer doesn't know. It's the consumer doesn't know what they don't know, whatever.
Exactly.
And it's almost the Henry Ford thing, which is like, if people didn't know they needed the cars, but they wanted a faster horse.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Interesting. What were the lessons you took from Spotify, or like working? Because that's 2013 when that was getting going.
Exactly. So they were really taking off in the US then. So I was in New York. They sort of just launched in the US. I think there's a few things that I learned from Spotify. I do think. So I think first of all, they had a really impressive way of building a culture around the company. And I've probably never been in a company that was as mission driven and as sort of gelled together by that strong mission. And I think it sort of came from the founders just being totally obsessed with music themselves and wanting for real to sort of solve the pains of the music industry. And so I think that was really impressive for me to see at a young age how you at that scale already then, they were sort of, I think probably 1,500 people or 1,000 people, but it was so strong in terms of how everyone sort of felt and wanted and lived this sort of Spotify values and wanting to be part of that sort of momentum that was happening. So I think that was really impressive.
Yeah.
I think the second thing was actually on the topic of data. I think already back then, Spotify was incredibly data-driven in how they were running their business.
Yeah.
And very high sort of hypothesis-led in everything that they did. So there was always this, very concrete sort of thoughtful planning on what we were doing and why, led by hypotheses. So, essentially trying to figure out there's 1,000 things that they could be doing, right? They could be adding a new sort of version of Spotify for in your car. They could be sort of adding audiobooks. They could be doubling down on video, which they did and then pulled back on a little bit. And all of these different bets, opportunities that they had, they were always very sort of hypothesis-led in how they thought about those. That was essentially that sort of came to me in my role, and it was very sort of...
Is there a specific example of that?
One specific example was looking... So I was part of the team that was trying to drive free to premium conversion. So essentially trying to get more people to pay for Spotify.
They still have a free Spotify now?
I think they do, yeah.
Really? And then there's just a shitload of ads on them?
I actually don't know what the experience is like because I've been paying since like 2008. But,
Same here. Yeah.
So I don't really know. But back at that time, there's a bunch of different things that you can test to try to get people to pay more, right?
Yeah.
And the methodology that I sort of learned there was map out all the different potential tests we could be doing through sort of brainstorming, but then rank them all by you guessing. With data-driven sort of thinking, try to guess what opportunities have the biggest potential to have real impact. And you do that through math. So you sort of break that down into, let's say, we think into a hypothesis. So to get more people, one hypothesis could be to get more people to pay for Spotify, we want them to have a bigger pay button on the subscription page. If we make that button this big, we think that's going to make people pay to a greater extent, right? They can't really miss the button, right? That's one hypothesis. It's a fucking stupid hypothesis, but it's still there. And what you do is you break that down then. If we do, what's the maximum impact we can have on this metric and how does that impact the conversion rate? Actually, this is a pretty shit example, so let's pull this out.
Yeah.
But
No, I get exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
What they're doing is essentially, and what we're doing within Mimo as well, like there's a shit ton of opportunities we could be having. And what we're trying to do is to to prioritize across our endless of opportunities to go after. We use an approach where we try to guess which opportunities have the biggest impacts through an hypothesis. And then we essentially break these hypotheses down into assumptions and we test each assumption leading up to that hypothesis. It's a little bit theoretical.
Yeah, no, basically, because again, a lot of these questions are asked selfishly, right?
Yeah.
So it's like with this, we've got the podcast in like terms of like verticals or revenue streams. So like podcast sponsorship, production company. So we actually produce other people's podcasts.
Right.
So we've got that up and running. We've got Hungry Productions.
Right.
We've got this thing called House of Creativity, which is like when we go into brands and essentially jolt or inject like how to think creatively, creative being into brands. Again, like that's a small fire that's starting. And And so then we've got these and then actually I suppose within the sort of the brand partnerships, it's like, sorry. The other thing is events. So we do like in-person events, supper clubs. We're trying to do this big festival next year with founders where we take, it's almost like, I want to really build the brand experientially. So like, almost that your 1,000 true fans, like Kevin Kelly, right?
Yes.
Probably more like your 50 diehard fans, you know? But I'm like, fuck me, I've got a lot on my plate.
Yes.
And I think a lot of founders that I speak to, brands, it's the same thing. It's like, do I go for Sainsbury's, or there's this Selfridges want to do this sick activation with my brand?
Yes.
Which one do I like? Exactly. When you've got a panoply and a buffet of wonderfully delicious opportunities, and I really believe that distractions masquerade as opportunities. I suppose the art is trying to decipher it.
Yes.
Like, how do you figure that out? Like, what have you learned about that from either Spotify and or with Mimo?
I think what they were really good at teaching me early was, first of all, it sort of came down to, for each of your opportunities, doing sort of two things. One, trying to put a value on it, like if this thing happens, what is it worth? That's one exercise. And the second thing to do was essentially to take that opportunity, break it down into its component parts. So for you to run a successful event, what are the things that needs to happen for that event to be really successful? And then you look at each of those components and try to judge, how likely am I to succeed with this, right? That gives you a broader picture of the sort of probability for you to reach your end goal, which is reaching the
what would be some of those things?
For you, it might be, I want to make sure that this is an event that makes X amount of revenue and yields this much reach. I need to have 50 people or 100 people with a certain caliber, right?
Yeah.
For those to come, the second component is I need 1 or 2 or 3 really great speakers that has enough reach to be able to attract people. And then thirdly, I need to be able to produce an agenda and a story that's enticing to enough people to actually come. And logistically, it all needs to make sense. And so for those 4 things, those are the 4 things that sort of need to work out for your event to be successful. Now, for each of those, once you've actually gone through and sort of started thinking about each component, it's a lot easier for you to judge what the probability is for that event to be successful than sort of some of the other opportunities you might have. And then this is obviously a sort of pretty simplistic example, but the same holds then for what Mimo is doing. And when we're looking at what next products to build, for example, we're trying to judge what is the size of the opportunity, like who would care and how much would they care and how much money and usage could we expect. For that sort of to come true, what are the things that we need to believe? Well, first of all, we need to believe that we can build a product that solves these pain points. Second of all, we need to be able to generate this type of demand through a certain distribution motion or whatever it might be. And by breaking each problem down into its components, it's a lot easier to judge and weight where you should be spending your time. And then final piece is if you got 10, you probably need to kick out 7 or 8 of them and do 1 to 3.
Yeah. Max. I think focus is just, what Steve Jobs says, focus is saying no, or focus is no, essentially.
Exactly.
It's so hard.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And actually, I think the hardest bit is sometimes, say you've got something that's doing really well, like say, your main product, which is probably, the cash loaning.
Sure.
Like, that's doing really, really well. But the journey. I think this is why it's hard. The journey that started small. So actually, you often have a big fire, then you have these smaller little fires.
Yes.
And I think the hardest bit has been like, okay, well, could this become big?
Yeah.
Because you've been on that journey of like it being small to big, and I think that's why it's so complicated. Because it's not like you're thinking, the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule's good right now, but what it doesn't take into account is actually context.
Yeah.
And past tense, i.e. the 80-20 rule of like you're looking at the thing at the projects right now, but this one's been going for 5 years and this one's been going for 3 months.
Yeah.
They're not, you're comparing oranges to Ferraris.
Yes.
It's not the same thing.
Exactly.
And I think that's why it's such a hard and complex task.
Yes.
And you don't want to drop things, and it's interesting.
It is. And I think it's it relates a lot, I think, to how first of all, that's the opportunity for small companies, in that large companies have gone all in on their big thing, and they're too busy running the big thing that they're missing the small piece, right? So I think that's the opportunity for all the companies that we're working with that are sort of coming into a new category where the big players haven't gotten there yet, because the big players are busy and they're busy running their 80%, right? And so they haven't had the time to focus on the remaining stuff. But I think obviously it comes down to resourcing. And I think the one, like if you're looking at, again, at sort of tech parallel, I think Revolut is a really interesting example where they've been able to sort of within the Revolut ecosystem sort of create these mini startups that are launching new products.
I don't know much about Revolut. So for context, I know it's a bank.
It's a bank.
What do they go back a couple of steps, or what do they do differently? And then in these little mini sort of startups that are blossoming within the ecosystem.
So I think what they're able to do is essentially, I think it's probably a slightly less relevant sort of parallel, but I think what they've been able to do, like Revolut is a bank. They've been able to ship and sort of build a bank with a very broad set of functionality. They started with consumer, sending sort of money internationally, and now they got a full business bank. They've been expanding really quickly. Now, why it matters for us, I think, is sort of two things. One is they've been really good at isolating focus. And essentially, instead of having, you run both the podcast as well as, in parallel, try to run the event and then, 3 other things, you get diluted focus. You might drop the first thing. They've been able to leverage their resources to essentially scale you and invest a new person or new people to run the next thing. So that's one thing, obviously distributing your focus by adding more resource.
Yeah.
But I think the other cool thing that I think we're seeing brands that are succeeding, what they're doing really well is also align like the investments that they're making into they align the investments that they're making with the expected time of return on that investment. This is a bit of a sort of theoretical thing, but we got lots of companies that we're working with that are struggling to think through, when do I raise more capital from angels? When do I use, debt capital to fund certain parts of my business? And I think there's this interesting frame of mind that I think maybe one can have with sort of prioritization in general, which is, I need to find resources and invest resources that align with how quickly I'm going to get a return. And so for many of the brands that we're working with, they might have sort of an up and running business that's humming nicely, and they're using sort of debt funding to fund their day-to-day operations. But then they have this new shiny opportunity out to the right where they want to sort of launch in the US. Right? Mm-hmm. I want to sort of find new resources to launch into Walmart, and it's a huge opportunity. It's going to cost us lots of money. You got this sort of 80-20 prioritization thing challenge. How do I balance, running my core business here in the UK while trying to figure that thing out? And what we're sort of discussing with some of them when it comes to cash flow management is how do you make sure that you're taking sort of cash and investing the type of cash and resources you have and aligning the timeline of that cash with the expected return. So concretely, when you're running your business day to day, you fund that with something that's sort of relatively short term and align it to what your business needs short term today to just keep running your business. And then when it comes to a US expansion, you're going to need more patient capital and resources. You're going to need equity investments from angels that are going to say, okay, cool, we're going to need $5 million to launch our brand into the US.
Yeah.
And it's going to take us probably 3 years before we can even see some of that return because there's going to be a long trough of investment. And you need that then patience from those funders to understand and align with you on that plan. And I think it sort of there's this parallel on how you balance both sort of where you spend your resource, but also what you expect in terms of payoff across different initiatives.
And also what I love about that is the timing, the time of the payoff.
Exactly.
Because it's like, for example, again, and asking this selfishly because I think it will help others as well. But it's like this house of creativity thing, right? It's like we've just started that, right? And I literally had a call with James, the guy I'm setting it up with today. It's like, yeah, we've got someone, we've basically got our first client done. We want to get it set up. But like right now, from a revenue perspective, that's kind of small comparatively to say keeping the main thing.
Yes.
But it's like, oh, hang on, I've been doing the podcast for 5 years now. Of course, that's going to be bigger.
Exactly.
Well, actually, that. Once if you can actually productize that, so it's like you know what that is. Obviously, it's case by case per client, but there's actually some sort of systemization there. And actually, you could probably rinse and repeat that. You could maybe bring someone in who's really good and actually scale that, so it's kind of nothing's passive.
Right.
But I think the point I suppose we're both digging into is there's priorities. There's also having the sort of prudence and gumption to be able to look into the future and be like, this may be small now, but it could be big later.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Interesting.
And I think one way of enabling yourself to do that, right, to invest into the new thing, is to put a structure that's repeatable on your long-term thing that's already working.
Yes.
So that's one thing that many of the brands that we're working with, they realize that, okay, cool, if I'm using, Mimo to fund my regular working capital, just to fund my regular business, it's going to mean that I'm having, 2, 3, 4, 5x more in the bank every month. Some of that money I'm going to take, and instead of sort of just holding that in working capital and inventory, I'm going to take some of that money to invest into a new country expansion or, a new product or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so I think it's sort of being smart about then setting yourself up on the thing that works. How do you set that up to pull as little resources from you as possible, both obviously financial, but also time, such that you can allocate that to something else. And I think that's one thing that we're trying to educate or sort of talk to founders about. And hey, don't use, your dearly beloved equity where you've sort of sold big chunks of your company. Don't use that to have products sitting in inventory, because products sitting in inventory, you're going to get paid, 2 months from now. So use something shorter term than your equity, and then take the equity and do something more exciting, something that has a bigger upside up potential.
I don't know where I read this, but I think it's like cash and money is energy. And I think like if you boil it right, step back, and it's actually what we're saying in terms of prioritization is where you're spending money or where you're getting money is where you're putting your energy. There's a dance between those two things.
Exactly.
And I think it's fascinating. I'm obsessed with Spotify. Like I'm an avid user, right?
Yeah,
I use it
super.
And actually, I suppose I fucking owe Daniel Ek a lot, because like what he's done for podcasting is the way what they've done in terms of going after Apple is fascinating from our perspective. And you've got to move quick, but then also the way they're sort of finding their feet against YouTube is fascinating. What underrated lessons do you take from your time there? Not from being at Spotify, were like underrated?
It's a good question.
If you're a challenger brand that's absolutely killing it in D2C, but you're struggling to crack retail, then you've got to listen to this. Maybe you've got an Ocado listing, maybe you've got a Whole Foods listing, maybe you're absolutely killing it in Selfridges, maybe you're absolutely killing it in your farm shop and your indies. But my friends, making the leap, crossing El Chasm, crossing El Rubicon to grocery retail is not easy. It's the Champions League of FMCG. It's super hard. It means playing at a higher level, and that's where so many amazing brands sadly stumble. Look, retailers want stories backed by data, not dreams, and a pretty pitch deck. And let's be real, supermarkets are not just going to magically make a space for you and your little brand. They need data. Something's got to go for you to get in, for you to get on shelf. And that is why I've got to tell you about North Star. They are the team that's helping purpose-led FMCG brands go from gut instinct dreams to unstoppable pitch decks that actually unlock retailers. North Star are not like another data company that force feed you data like foie gras, that act like a NASA space mission. It's super simple to use. Their team are amazing and they actually get the challenger mindset. North Star are your shortcut to smarter decisions, stronger pitches, and investor confidence, all built specifically for challenger brands like yours. You don't need a massive sales team, you need North Star. Link in the show notes. Click that link and you'll be able to book a free demo with North Star. Highly recommend that, and thank me later.
So one thing that I did take away that also goes a little bit back to our arts versus data discussion is, so a little bit of background. So I was on this growth team trying to get more people to move from free to paid Spotify. Spotify at the time was growing immensely quick. As a sort of digital consumer business, there's a shit ton of data. And at the time, I was working with this new cool thing called big data, which now sort of evolved into AI.
What? Yeah, was that? Yeah, because that was when I was at uni. So I was at uni 2013, 2016. There was this whole big data was being sort of force fed down your throat. Yeah. Was that just the? That
was probably by then
the precursor to AI.
Yeah, sort of.
Cool.
And I think the sort of the learning that I'm trying to get to is we crunched a shit ton of data to try to understand how people use the product and how different behaviors could essentially infer them to pay to a greater extent. And we spent months looking at lots of data. And in the end, my key conclusion and learning was that we could sort of guessed lots of the things that we found out on day one. Even if we looked at so much data, done fancy analysis, we've gone through in customer interviews and so on. But a lot of it came down to a realization that more data is not always giving you more information. It's creating more noise. And what you need is actually sometimes less data. You need the right data, not more data. And so that was, I think, one of the core learnings that I had there, that more data is not always great. You want less data, but you want the most important data.
Nassim Taleb's got a wonderful quote about that when there's too much data. And he says, do you know who he is? He's like,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. We'll get onto the barbell strategy.
Yeah.
But he basically, he says, if you're crossing a road crossing and you're looking at what color clothes everyone's wearing, you'll miss the lorry that's coming past you.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? And it's like you can get so bogged down in the minutiae of data that you don't actually step back and see the bigger picture, which is fascinating. So what have you picked up from Nassim Taleb and how have you applied that to your business? Because he's got a myriad of wonderful books.
Yeah.
I think Anti-Fragile, I've just reread Fooled by Randomness. Like, I just love the way he thinks.
Yeah.
What have you picked up from him?
Look, I think I can't say I'm a Nassim Taleb sort of know-it-all, but I have sort of read some of his stuff on, black swans and sort of outlier events. I do think it's probably also having sort of been, as a VC, I met thousands of companies every year. I said no to thousands of companies every year, not investing in them, and probably said yes to, a handful at max. Now, I think some of the parallels to the sort of black swan sort of theory, I think sometimes gives me a little bit of I look at business building a little bit in that sort of with the lens of black swans, in that you don't necessarily always know and you can't always predict sort of how things are going to play out in your particular business and whether you're going to be the one that sort of ramps up really quickly and explodes and sort of does really well, or if you're going to be the one that sort of tapers off. Like, are you going to be the black swan business that does really well? To a great extent, you don't necessarily know. And to some extent, maybe you can't even control it. Like, for many large companies, there's always this element of luck.
Yeah.
And I think if there's anything, I'd probably say that having, spent time as a VC, having met thousands of amazing founders that are, pushing so hard every day to build beautiful businesses, but still not making it or not being the right fit for our investment. I think the sort of black swan idea of you not necessarily being in control has almost given me a little bit of inner peace when it comes to building a business and just being respectful for the process, in that you don't necessarily know exactly what's going to happen. You can't control everything. Like, there's always an element of luck in any business. And so as long as you sort of keep chugging away on whatever you can do, then you'll be fine. And maybe you'll get the black swan event for yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about black swan mostly as positive.
So yes, I think black swan's negative, white swan's positive.
White swan, fair enough.
Yeah. That's why. That's the way I sort of frame it. But it's interesting because it's like, again, one of his big things is barbell strategy, which is holding two opposing things at once.
Right.
That makes you anti-fragile, right?
Like,
for example, like the way he describes it is investing, right? So it's like have a big chunk of your proportion in low risk bonds that are just going to keep taking away with some high risk stuff.
Yeah.
Those two opposing tensions make you anti-fragile. It's the barbell strategy.
Yep.
And I think what you're saying there, mate, I completely agree. It's like his whole thing is probabilistic thinking, right? Versus deterministic. And I think that's a good barbell strategy. It's like be deterministic, like this is where we're going.
Yep.
This is how Spotify's going to get built. This is the vision. But then actually be pretty loose, fluid in the sense that there's something's going to go your way and a lot's going to go not your way.
Exactly.
But I think where people get bogged down is you're one or the other.
Yeah.
You know? It's interesting.
And I think it relates a lot to many of the brands we're working with in sort of how they minimize risk for themselves. I think one of the core, when we're judging whether to offer funding, for example, to a brand, one of the core things we're looking at is sort of revenue concentration, right? I think we've sort of
What do you mean by revenue concentration?
So revenue concentration would essentially think about it in terms of how distributed your source of revenue is.
Yeah.
If you're a brand that's just coming out, that's selling 95% of your revenue to one wholesaler or one grocer, that's a lot higher risk for us and for you than if you sit with 10, 15, 20 relatively easily sort of evenly distributed wholesalers and maybe a little bit of on-trade and off-trade, and you distribute your risk. And I think we've seen some, especially recently, some brands that have sort of gone really deep all in with one particular sort of partner, customer. And then for different reasons, maybe there's a bit of a black swan, they get pulled out. And then obviously having all your eggs in that basket can put you in a pretty tough spot. So again, that sort of probabilistic thinking of, hey, how do I minimize my risk by making sure that I try to not only go really deep with one, but hopefully spread my risks a little bit, really help me sort of maximize my opportunities, right? Obviously, it's an easy sort of thing to say, but it's so clear for some of the ones that we've seen gone through a tough time recently has been that sort of high concentration towards one end of the barbell, if you may. You essentially have all your eggs on one side of the barbell, which can be really high opportunity in terms of growth and size, right? You're signing this one big grocer, and maybe that could be the one that takes you to the stars. But if it doesn't happen, you're fucked. And that's the sort of balance.
And also, I think it's the being able to. If what I love is like seeing business from 1,000 feet and 10,000 feet. From 1,000 feet, you may look and think, right, if we go into Tesco's, right, we are gonna, for us, we've got to just say yes to that and say no to everything else.
Yes.
That makes sense from 1,000 feet.
Yes.
From 10,000 feet, you don't know what, and this is where Taleb's probabilistic thinking comes in. You don't know that Tesco may have a faltering system with their, have a black swan event where, this happened to M&S recently, all their fucking things went down, all the checkers, right? You don't know what's coming.
Exactly.
The CEO may do something nefarious and get caught, I don't know, shagging someone, for example. You don't know what's going to happen, right? So it's like and I think that's another tension of like looking at your business from close up versus zoomed out.
Yeah.
And I think it's that, and again, I suppose what everyone's trying to do is have some sort of, and I think it's a human thing of like some sort of, we grapple with nature.
Of course.
And ultimately, what I like, I study a lot of Stoicism. I like Stoic thinking. Until Taleb basically said, all Stoicism is because people are so scared of randomness.
Right.
When you actually put it like that, that whole Marcus Aurelius like focus of what's in your control. It's humans' desire that we don't like randomness, but randomness is coming.
Right.
Mate, it's absolutely fascinating. What are some of the sort of big ideas you've studied from, say, tech or from books or from mentors that you've implemented in your business that have really like had a profound effect on your growth? And this could be personal, this could be with Mimo. Like, what are some of those big ideas you've picked up?
I think they're relatively, I have a few sort of truths that I hold pretty highly. I'm not sure they're that revolutionary, but I think the first one is, like, again, I think it comes down to sort of that understanding of customer love and customer need and what it is. And I think especially like in a pretty digital world, like we're a digital company largely, I think it's totally underrated how much value you get from sitting down next to your customer, looking them in the eye and understanding them and their business. And I think that's way underrated. And I think it's sort of just one of these things that we're trying to do a lot of, just to make sure that we stay very close to our customer to understand what problems we can actually solve for them. Now, it's not particularly revolutionary, but I do think that many people forget nowadays how important it is to actually meet people in person and hear people, see people, how they react.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one thing that we hold pretty highly. I think another thing is sort of being part of and building teams that are incredibly competitive. Personally, I think that's one of the most exciting things of being in a small company, in sort of trying to build a culture and a team where people really want to grow not only the business but also themselves, and sort of creating an environment where you, through sort of structured feedback and sort of a lot of drive, can get people to do a lot more than what they thought. I actually think that's one of the coolest thing of being in a small company, seeing how people can really grow in a short period of time. So that's one of the things that I am really, really excited about. I think apart from that, it sort of relates to the third one, but giving people, and this is also like very much like a leadership thing, giving people a lot more ownership than they think that they can sort of take on is an amazing way to scale your business. And I think it's sort of, there's this sort of, I don't know if you, in sort of tech circles, there's this sort of idea of founder mode.
Oh my God, that's Paul Graham.
Yeah, it's Paul Graham.
I literally was going to talk to you about that essay.
Yeah.
I love that essay. We'll get onto that, but yeah.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that, in that sort of you as a business owner, you care a lot about your business. But I think the most powerful thing is if you're able to get more people in a company to buy into that same mentality, and not only limiting that to founders. So I think that is sort of a third aspect that I believe matters and that I sort of try to hold on to. Those are a few examples.
Let's dive deeper into some of those. I like the competitiveness one. I think there's baked into competitiveness can be neuroticism, which is dangerous. Because you look at your competition, you become your competition. If you look at categories in food and drink,
right?
I mean, look at protein bars.
Yeah.
I mean, look at fucking drinks now. They've all, look at your competition, you become your competition. I think rivalry's good. There's a nuance. Rivalry pushes you forward, but you still stay true to your core.
Yeah.
How do you manage that tension of like neuroticism not drooling and folding and slowly becoming neuroticism?
Yeah. I think about competition probably more in the sense of sort of speed and urgency of execution. So like if you want to get to a target, you need to make sure you're running in the right direction, right? You need to set the direction of where you're going, and then you need to run as quickly as you can in that direction. Those are the two components of getting to a target. Now, I think on the first one, setting your direction, you need to make up your own mind. You can't look at competition to set the direction of where you are running. So you can't set, the direction in terms of your product or the offering that you're coming to market with based on competition. I think that's the wrong starting point. However, when it comes to the second dimension of getting to a goal, which is speed of execution or speed of running in that direction, that's where I think it's more helpful. That's where I think you can not necessarily look at a competitor, but sort of be competitive with yourself. Like to me, I've been competitive my whole life. I used to do competitive sailing on pretty high level. And I think if I'm looking at sort of running a business today, to me, yes, I really do believe that we can help our customers a lot. I do believe that there's an opportunity for us to create value for customers. Frankly, personally, I'm also very driven by the competitive aspect of trying to scale a business. I think that's a fun challenge. And I think sort of trying to build a business is like trying to play in the Premier League in football. So I think I think on the first aspect of direction, I don't think you should consider competition too much. On the second aspect, I think you should, but you should probably anchor it in competition internally rather than against something external, if that makes sense.
Mate, that's such a gorgeous answer, because there is why I love going along with these conversations. It allows you to get into the sort of the weeds of nuance. Because I think what you said there is perfect. It's like, don't let the competition set where you're going. 1, 2, embrace competition, because competition makes you better.
Yeah.
Like, survival of the fittest. Like, pulling this back to nature, we need competition. Like, all this shit around us was built because of competition.
Exactly.
That's part of our nature, and let's not deny that. But then also using it as an inside job, not an outside distraction.
Yeah.
I think that's the hardest part. How do you get your team to, on that inside-outside, where the center of gravity of competitiveness is coming from?
Yeah.
How do you anchor that internally?
So we're actually right now sort of refining. So we're just passing 30 people in the company. Yep. We're starting to sort of become a little bit bigger. We're actually introducing this new performance management sort of framework across the full company. So on a quarterly basis, we're essentially scanning and sort of scoring and assessing everyone in the company. And we're doing it across 3 different sort of components. One is, to what extent people act in line with our values. That's the first thing. The second thing is, to what extent they sort of deliver on their tasks in the business on a day-to-day.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, whether they have certain skills that's required for their role. So that's very sort of role specific. Now, the way we think about sort of encouraging competition, if you may, or competitive behavior, is being very, very clear on each of these components, what to expect from different people in their particular role. And in particular, being very clear on what's expected from them today, but also what the opportunity is in terms of growth to get to the next level. Yeah. And essentially being extremely clear on, hey, if you are competitive and you want to win in the sense of getting to the next stage of your career, or getting to the next stage of having an impact on a business, then these are the things that we expect you to reach. And so by being very clear on a framework, on saying these are the things that you need to do to get to the next level if you're competitive, it's all laid out here. And by doing that on a quarterly basis, we're helping people understand what it means to be competitive within the context of Mimo. Because you can be competitive in lots of different ways, but it's not necessarily, we sort of try to funnel that in the right direction towards what is most beneficial for the company.
Yeah, so, you can have someone who doesn't really care about their job, but you put them on a 5-a-side court or a paddle court, and
exactly.
It's like a different beast emerges.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so I think by being very, very clear on sort of, this is how we think about performance, and this is your opportunity to take this next step in terms of performance and impact towards the company. By making that more clear, it's a lot easier then for someone who is competitive and is ambitious to say, okay, cool, I know what to do now to get to the next level, which is usually the sort of hardest piece in business or in any sort of non-sport. Sort of the nice thing about sports is that everything's sort of framed. There's clear rules, there's clear goals. But in many businesses, you don't necessarily have that in the same way. Like you get to work, you do your thing. Maybe someone once a year tells you whether you're doing a good job or not. But it's hard to relate to on a day-to-day. And so we're trying to just make it a little bit more concrete with a more sort of clear framework around what performance actually is.
Yeah. So I love that. So you said the sort of 3 principles were customer obsessiveness, the competitiveness, and what was the third one again?
The aspect of essentially allowing, so it's this relation to founder mode and giving people more ownership than they think they can take.
Right. Okay. Go into that, because that's there's a lot to that.
There is a lot to that. I think the main aspect here, and I think what's been the most exciting for me working in these early stage companies and small companies, is the ability to see oftentimes young people grow a lot in a short period of time, take on more responsibility, realize that they can take on more responsibility and sort of grow and come taller into the office on a day-by-day basis. I think that's one of the coolest things what can happen in a sort of young, fast-moving company. The best way to do that is take someone that's ambitious, that has sort of raw talent, raw skill in some way, and then see if they sink or swim almost. By dropping them in on the deep end, helping them obviously to sort of realize what tools they have to swim, but in particular giving more responsibility than they probably thought that they could take on, and then coaching them through that journey. I think that's an incredibly exciting path. I'm a sort of big sucker for personal development myself, and I think it's a really cool part of building a company. And I think it relates a little bit to founder mode, in that sort of founder mode I think is almost too one-sided, in that, in sort of the way Paul Graham talks about founder mode. I think that's great, and I think you do see a lot of that.
Just detail that for listeners, because it's an essay by Paul Graham, Y Combinator. I think he's based in Cambridge, American guy. Founded he did Airbnb, Dropbox. I mean, whatever he touched turns to fucking gold, quite literally.
Yeah.
But writes is an incredible. But used to be a painter, incredible essayist. Almost writes. It's almost like the Hemingway of writing about tech. I think. Just there's no fat to his words. To his prose. But he's got this essay called Founders Mode, which was based on a talk by Brian Chesky, I think it is. Yeah. And he's based, and I'd love to get your take on this, right? Because what he's essentially saying is, the discourse in universities is that we're taught, and I went to business school, we're taught very management speak, how to be a manager, how to manage, or like we're taught entrepreneurships by people who've never actually been an entrepreneur. So there's no discourse for founder mode.
Yeah.
The only learning you can really get is either through experience, mentors, and arguably biographies, autobiographies, right? And I think what he's trying to say is, as you get bigger and bigger, the founder almost gets ousted from the business, because all these managers come in and they're like, okay, this is how we run the business now.
Yes.
And he's essentially saying that with that can happen, but then the business loses its magic, right? And the founder mode is what he's trying to say is we need a almost, I don't know, what would you say the rallying cry is from that essay? Like, is it, he doesn't really give a solution. I think that's kind of the point of the essay, isn't it? It's like, we don't know what the answer is to this, but hopefully there's more discourse on founder mode further down the line.
Yeah, indeed. I think my sort of synthesis would be that he's claiming that there's this old world of running a company where, as a founder and as a leader, the idea is that you hire a bunch of smart people and then you sort of delegate and let them run with what they're supposed to be doing and own that. And then you sort of zone out, right? You as a sort of top leader, you zone out and you let them do their thing. Whereas he's arguing that sort of companies like Airbnb then, where Brian as the CEO, where he is sort of actively engaging in all of the details of the business, not letting go of website copy or exactly the customer experience and user experience through different user flows, not letting go of that detail, that's where the magic happens. That's sort of how I sort of look at his essay. Now, I do think that's right in that sort of founders and leaders that still obsessed about the details and don't let those go, that's usually a net positive, right? I think whoever's read books about Steve Jobs.
That's a barbell, isn't it?
Yeah, probably.
It's probably like on the left-hand side, it's founder obsession, not letting go. On the right-hand side, it's letting go and letting people grow and do their own thing.
Right.
It's like, how far do you go on that barbell? I think the last thing to ever let a founder should let go of is brand and tone of voice.
Right.
Everything else, they can kind of let go and let people run.
Right.
But my perspective would be that, and there's a few brands I've spoken to, Citizens of Soil. Yep. I don't know if you work with any of these. Citizens of Soil.
Yep, Michael, we know.
Yeah. Fucking wonderful human beings.
Great guy.
Bold Bean, Amelia.
Yep.
Both good friends, both been on the show. And awesome. I think Amelia and Sarah were talking and saying, if we let go of anything, the absolute last thing to ever let go of is brand.
Right.
So it's like, what does it? And also, I think you sort of delegate within that, but
Sure.
having your sort of tentacles in that of like, what's the copy on the back of the packaging?
Right.
But I think that's an interesting tension.
Yeah.
And I think so you're basically saying you kind of disagree with Paul Graham, or what on that essay essentially, or.
I think it may be overly simplistic and sort of a little bit one-sided in that it's very focused on the founder and sort of what the founder does, which I think is sort of relevant probably to, a very small share of people in a business, obviously.
Yeah.
Now, I think that level of obsession is key. And I think it's sort of important for a founder to maintain. But I think it's even more powerful if you're able to create that level of obsession in others as well. Now, obviously, you can't do that.
Yes.
You can't do that across a full company. Like everyone in a company can't be obsessed by everything. But I think being able to transfer the way I care about a business, about Mimo, to someone else is tenfold more powerful than only me doing it. And so I think that is the nuance that I think is important for that essay, in that I think it's the right thing. I don't think you should outsource and sort of delegate and then zone out. But I think the more interesting bit is if and how you can essentially sort of let that obsession transpire to more people. And I think one of the best ways of doing that is giving people more ownership than they probably thought that they could take on, and then sort of try to figure out how to help them get there.
How do you help them get there?
I think it really varies, actually. I think it becomes a little bit of this coaching journey where some people don't necessarily want hand-holding or coaching. They want to sort of figure it out themselves, and then, maybe you need to sort of steer them a little bit over time, whereas others look for more active coaching. So I think it really varies. I don't think there's a cookie-cutter approach. But I think common denominator that I've seen across some of the companies that I work with is this idea of having relatively young, sort of definitely sort of talented, skilled people come in and then giving them more responsibility than they think they can take on. It's this amazing foundation to both sort of have them grow themselves, but also then sort of scale your company.
Business. You said you love your personal development. What are the biggest weaknesses you've had to work on since day dot, really?
I think there's a bunch. So I think there are a few that are very related to like the day-to-day job, and then there's a few that are more related to the person and me as a person.
Let's start with the person.
So I think as a person, I think one of the main challenges that I've had to work on is actually a little bit on the obsession piece. So I've got 2 young kids, 3 and 6 years old. I got a wife, and I'm also running this company. I tend to get a little bit obsessed with one thing at a time. And that thing for quite some time has been Mimo as a company. And so balancing being, a dad and a husband and trying to do all those things at once, that's been a real struggle. And I'd argue definitely at some points a weakness of mine. I think the way to do it is sort of forcing yourself and time boxing yourself. And sort of, I think I sort of mentioned my schedule a little bit before this, just being very, very strict on how I spend my time. That's been a real struggle on the personal side. I think related to that is sort of friendships and making sure that I am responsive and reach out to my friends, especially in intense periods.
Right.
So I think those are like 2 things that have been challenging and that I'm sort of working on actively to try to improve on. Trying to, in particular, just balance different sort of priorities, especially given I tend to get sort of laser focused on one thing. And I think so far, like before I had a wife and kids, that was a real sort of asset. And I think it's still an asset, but I think it sort of comes to a point where you need to figure out how to balance the things. So I think, those are 2.
What insecurities do you have?
So I'm definitely sort of I'm definitely one that's sort of proven my sort of put my own worth to a large extent on performance in some
Same
way.
here, yeah.
Right? And so whether it was me being sort of 14 years old, competing in sailing and sort of doing that on high level across Europe, and sort of, putting my identity a lot in this notion that I was a high-performing dude or boy. That's always been the thing. And so obviously that's sort of coming from some sort of insecurity, and that sort of me needing that performance to feel validated.
Yeah.
And so I think there's definitely, and then where that comes from, I think it's probably a bigger topic.
What's the bigger topic?
I think, well, I'm not necessarily sure whether that's sort of from, honestly, I'm not really sure where it comes from, but I do think it's sort of, I do think it's just one of these identities that I picked up really early in school and sort of in, my life.
What were you like at school?
So I started, I was born, or I started school with people a year older than me.
Interesting.
So I started school, so in Sweden you start school at 7, or I did at 7, but I was a year younger.
Yeah, about the Nordic countries.
Yeah, we started a little later. But I started a year early.
Yeah.
And unless you've noticed, my body posture is not the biggest. And in particular, when I was a kid, I was even smaller. So I was, 1 year younger, and I was a small kid. So that in combination meant that, my classmates were probably like, half a meter taller than me.
Yeah.
In many cases.
Yeah.
That meant that I was sort of, I think oftentimes, I've always felt like the young kid, the little kid. I think I still get that sometimes coming into a room, right? I still feel like that.
Really? Yeah, interesting, yeah.
And so I think that's definitely part of it, right? Having grown up with that notion and then sort of latching then my identity on not being the little kid, but the high-performing kid, or the whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. It's fascinating, yeah, because I think with a lot of Type A people, but behind, I don't think it's quite reductionist to think that, every Type A person's got some sort of insecurity. Like, we've all got insecurities.
Yeah.
I was a chubby fuck at school, right? I still love my food, right? But like a lot of it is bashing through that just feeling of it in some form of inadequacy. And I think everyone feels inadequate in their own way.
Yeah.
But it's super fascinating. And
yeah, again, I exactly. I don't think it's necessarily that unique.
It's not. That's what I think. It's not unique. It's just not often talked about.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
It's kind of like uncommon common sense, right? It's like everyone's got it. It's just it's not commonly talked about.
Yeah.
And go into sailing because I think we've talked a lot about like prudence and like weathering storms and probabilistic sort of tinkering and thinking.
Yeah.
Ultimately, sailing a boat is kind of, I'm sure, is analogous to running a startup in some regards.
Yeah.
But first, to like preface going into that is what's the difference between like a good sailor and like a really world-class sailor? Like how do they see the world?
Right.
Between someone who's kind of good rudimentary versus someone who's like world-class.
Right. I think it's a good question. I think it sort of comes down to, a few things.
Yeah.
I think first of all, sort of, we spoke a little bit like, I think getting to a goal, there's this combination of two things. Right? You need to run in the right direction or sail in the right direction.
Yeah.
And you need to do it fast, right?
Interesting.
And so I think, and I think you could sort of think about this a little bit similarly. I think going in the right direction, that a lot of it actually comes down to understanding your environment and being foresightful what's happening, in particular with the wind around you. So in sailing, the wind is what propels you forward. And so you being super foresightful in what's going on around you with the wind in particular in sailing is a very big driver of how well you do. Because you need to navigate around it. You need to catch, stronger wind to go faster and those kinds of things. So actually understanding sort of meteorology is a big thing. And
that's before you get in the boat.
That's before you get in the boat, or when you're getting in the boat. Like when you are in the boat, things are moving, right? Things are changing. The wind is not constant. It's moving around. There's clouds coming. There's a lot of sort of different dynamics. So that's one thing. And then obviously you need to take into consideration what other people are doing. So there's lots of, I think, pretty geeky comparisons to sailing and a startup. Which would be, for example, you can't pass anyone by following them in sailing. Like you need to.
I don't understand. What do you mean?
So in sailing, you can't sail exactly the same route and pass someone.
As in that's
physically impossible, right? You're going to crash into them.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was like a law, like you're not allowed to take their path.
No.
Okay, sorry.
So it's physically impossible for you to pass someone unless you take a different route.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a little bit of that sort of how you think about competition that you also need to take into consideration.
Yeah.
But that's the first piece then, going in the right direction. I think that boils down to understanding your environment, wind and waves, and then what your competition is doing. I think when it comes to speed in the right direction, there's two things. One is your boat and the setting of your boat and how you know the details of sort of setting your sails up for this particular condition. And then it's your physical behavior within that boat. So your strength, your core, your sort of how you're moving around, how you're compensating for wind by putting yourself outside of the boat. So I'd say those are like the four components that sort of breaks down whether you're doing well or not in sailing. And I think there's lots of parallels, obviously, but it's sort of comes down to direction and speed.
Yeah. No, I hadn't ever thought of it like that. And actually sort of the prudence before you even get in the water.
Yep.
A lot of the work is done up front, before.
Indeed.
Yeah, interesting.
Indeed.
So interesting. And I suppose that's almost, what we were saying earlier, like the art of getting the customer bit right before you even get in the market or get in the water.
Yeah.
It's all the work done beforehand. That's the art. That's being, seeing where the zephyrs are coming from, how choppy the waters are, whether the sun's in your face. Like, how do you win a race then? So say once you're in the mixer, right? So say again, applying this to a business, you're in, those three things, that, how you are in the boat,
right?
The sort of, you can't overtake someone, so you have to find your own path.
Yeah.
And then being aware of the conditions. Granted, once you're in the mixer and it's race time, how many boats are going around these races? Like,
it really varies.
Okay.
It really varies.
What's the biggest race you've been in, would you say?
So I've been in races probably with sort of 250 boats on a start line, but I've also been in races with sort of 15. And so it really varies.
Right. Which one would you prefer to race in?
So I prefer, towards the end of my career in sailing, I sailed a boat called 29ers, doesn't really matter, but so I sailed in the youth worlds, and then there was essentially one boat from each country representing that country.
And you were like, is it the sort of like when you're like fucking hanging off the side of it like that?
Exactly. So there's one person standing on the side of the boat, and then
so there's two of you in the boat.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
And so and I kind of prefer that sort of size of fleet when you're more like 30 boats than sort of 250. Mainly for logistical reasons. It's easier to sort of
Yeah.
I don't know. I just prefer that type of racing. But I think the main parallel to me that I sort of took away from sailing is probably like the process of trying to get to the youth worlds and sort of how you break that kind of a big goal down into like essentially a training program across years. Sort of me and in that particular case my crew. So we were two people. Like how do you put together a plan?
How did you do that? What was the plan?
Well, there was essentially a sort of 1.5 year plan where we sort of together jotted down like these are the things we think we need to improve to go through these qualifiers and sort of be able to actually get to the youth world. And then
again, it sounds really stupid, right? But like, how can you improve on things if all of it on the day is like weather conditions? Again, that could be a really ignorant. Like, what are some of the things you're working on?
So I think first of all, there's the direction of where you're going and then the speed. So the speed is obviously a big thing. How quickly you get the boat.
How do you get faster though? Like
there's so much granularity into that I think we can cover over a few pints.
Yeah.
But and it really varies by type of boat as well. But in essence, it has to do with sort of how you're setting up your sails in relation to the wind.
Yeah.
And how you're sort of sailing through waves. And there's always an optimum path.
Yeah.
For yourself to maximize the pace. And so what you consistently do, and everything's changing all the time, right?
Yeah.
So you're consistently trying to adapt.
This applies to startups. It's tinkering and it's 1% improvements.
Indeed.
That's literally it.
And it's always changing, right? So it's like being adapt to changing conditions and just try to continuously work towards finding the fastest route. And that's essentially it. And then there's lots of nuance, obviously.
Yeah. No, it's just there, as you say, there's a lot of what's the word? Just like parallels between everything. What was it like when you got to why did you get out of it? What was the reason to get out of sailing?
So it was, the main reason was, so the guy I did the Youth Worlds with, he...
How old were you at this point, by the way? Like,
I was 18.
18, okay.
And so he was, so we ended up 5th, and then him and I had been sort of doing this for like 1.5, 2 years together. And he was gonna do something else. He was essentially gonna take a gap year. He was a windsurfing guy, so he was gonna go windsurf somewhere else
beautiful.
and just have a good time.
Yeah.
And I was sort of keen on potentially doing like an Olympic campaign. That would be like the next logical step.
Yeah.
And so he left, and then I started trialing with a few different other people, but we never really clicked. So it's again this notion of sort of, you know, a little bit of luck and sort of timing, where sort of those things didn't really come together, and that I didn't really find, you know, the next person to do it with. And then instead I decided to, well, let's go study, and then maybe I'll find someone later, and then sort of life happened. So I think that's also why when I met my 2 co-founders, and we started ideating Mimo, like we just moved into a new apartment in Stockholm. My wife was pregnant like this with our second daughter, and I sort of proposed, hey, why don't, like, I think this is a really good timing now to start this company, but we need to move to a smaller apartment because we can't stay here, because I need to cut my salary by 80%. And I was...
Where were you working at the time?
So I was working at this US company, essentially helping them set up their business in Europe.
Right.
So
you were like a pretty decent salary.
Yeah, exactly. It was definitely like a pretty comfy sort of US director level salary.
There's a lot to talk about there.
Yeah. But then, you know, given the opportunity was there, and I sort of felt a little bit the pain of missing an opportunity before, I was really keen on doing it. And thankfully, my wife is very understanding and respectful and sort of flexible.
Yes.
So we found a way.
Well, that's the thing. Is another thing Taleb says is the only thing more addictive than heroin is a regular paycheck.
Right.
And I think it's like to cut off the bosom of funding it's not easy, you know.
Yeah. No.
So I have huge respect for that. Let's talk about 0 to 1. Let's talk about traction. Mm-hmm. And we can use, you know, Mimo, or we can use other business you've worked in.
Sure.
And I don't think like even I experienced with this, like it's when you look back retrospective, you're like, how the fuck did I do that?
Yeah.
Like even so for context, like we would I would do everything. So we obviously got rich with all these lights and shit, but it was just 2 iPhones.
Right.
And I'd do the whole thing.
Yeah.
And like now I'm in this sort of luxurious position. We've got a team. I'm like, how did you do that? And when you retrospectively look back, you think, fuck me. What are those moments when you retrospectively look back to those early days and you're like, fuck me, like how did I do that?
Yeah, I think I mean pulling the plug on my, you know, the previous employment and sort of actually deciding sort of we're doing this. That was obviously one of those situations, and it was actually my CTO and co-founder Andreas. We've been talking about like the idea for a while. We've been sort of, you know, meeting on evenings and weekends, sort of planning this thing out, sort of validating sort of demand and so on. And, you know, we started getting to the point where we needed to make a decision. Like either we do this or we don't. And it was funny because he just sent like a text one night just saying, I resigned. Like, are you guys joining me? And it was this trigger moment.
Skin in the game.
He sort of went first. Huge respect to him. We'd obviously discussed this a lot. Like, yes, we're going to do it. Yes, it's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. But when he actually did it, it sort of obviously sort of helped us sort of get across the line. And I think that's one of those moments that I sort of looking back, again, like my wife was very pregnant with our second daughter. We just moved into this new apartment. Interest rates were sort of hiking. And so housing cost was really hiking. And it was pretty bad timing, honestly. And so that was one of those moments. I think another moment was that I think a little bit about sometimes is sort of the first offsite we did. We were sort of about 5 people, I think, in the company. We literally just started. We went to my parents' place because we didn't really have anywhere to go.
Where's that? Is that
Like outside of Stockholm, and there was this sort of combination of thrill that sort of we're sort of starting to work on something that we think can be really big, and we're excited about that. But also in the back of my head, I had this sort of stress, right? Like, okay, this thing doesn't really work. This thing doesn't fly. Like, what am I going to tell my wife? And sort of, we pulled out of all of this sort of safety. And so there was this combination of thrill and sort of scare that I think I had at that offsite.
About that.
Where, I think, again, sort of looking back, was one of those moments where you sort of, happy that we went through with it. And I think to some extent, that's also the beauty of entrepreneurship and sort of many people starting companies. Like, you got lots of sort of seasoned entrepreneurs saying that if ask them if they do it again, that they say no, because they wouldn't know. Like, by now they know all the pain that they're going to go through to get there. And so I think you need to be a little bit not naive. Arrogant, but sort of naive to do some of these things.
And how did you get traction? What? Because I think traction's it's wind in the sails, quite literally.
Yeah.
But it's not the easiest thing to get. Like, so you set up this business with your 4 mates, well, 3 mates, or 3 co-founders. You're at your parents' gaff.
Yeah.
You're shitting yourself, but you're tremendously excited at the same time.
Yeah.
What are the 1, 2, 3 steps you take to actually get traction? In that first few months.
So I think there were a few things. I think first of all, we did have a few relationships that we leveraged to try to get those first dialogues going, and you can barely call them customers even, but initial dialogues to sort of validate the demand. And a lot of that was actually from early iZettle days and sort of relationships that we had from then here in London. So we'd literally fly over and we'd sort of knock on people's doors, sort of email, call, say, hi, can we just meet up? Just mind, we'd love to ask you about some things that we think you might have a problem with, to validate demand. I think the second phase was sort of out of that group, we started getting the first sort of signals of us being onto something. And they turned into our first few customers. Like, a lot of what we did then was fully manual. There wasn't even a sort of technology platform. We were literally sort of paying stuff on their behalf, with our own cash. It was very sort of scrappy, but it gave us those first relationships that gradually grew into our first real customer base. And that was sort of, we're talking about companies like Chris Kong at Better Nature and a few of those guys that sort of we early got in touch with to build that first little, understanding of what this product would be. After that, it was all hustle. Like, we were literally emailing, calling, biking, Boris bikes around London sort of to talk to people. And there was this, pretty long period of us just keeping a bunch of activity going, where there was lots of noise and lots of sort of, again, on the data piece, lots of data sort of for certain parts of the ecosystem not fitting with us, but then us honing in on what could actually work. So I think there was no secret sauce. I do think there was those 3 steps. Was one, we had a little bit of sort of initial sort of people that we could speak with to validate the company and the demand. Based on that, we had like a handful that could sort of say, okay, to be our first customers. And yes, there's a little bit of value that you're adding here, so let's continue working on that. And thereafter, leveraging those names, probably missed that detail, but leveraging those names a lot to validate ourselves when we started reaching out to more. So, those early names that we started working with, like Better Nature and Nice Drinks, Jeremy at Nice Drinks, and after some time, Surreal, really gave us that initial credibility to continue to expand our traction into more companies. And then, Hunter and Gather came through and made a few introductions, and then Moth Drinks. And so there's been, it's gradual, but I think it all starts with that sort of seed of finding high quality first customers that actually like what you do, and then leveraging that platform to get yourself into more dialogues.
I think that's, we were talking about science versus art. Like that's another art.
Yeah.
Is being prudent of like, because I think people talk about, your distribution is your marketing. They say that in brand building. So like, i.e. Selfridges is marketing.
Right.
It's almost like sales as much as it is, it's sales and marketing as one, because the prestige, the status of the account, blah, blah.
Right.
Same with Harrods. I think you can apply this to sort of other business as well. It's like your first customer is as much as a commercial partnership and relationship.
Yes.
But it's actually your marketing.
Yep.
Because it's your social proof for your next customer.
Yes, indeed.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think it's also the dimension. There's another dimension to that, which is it also, particularly maybe with our type of product, but it really informs your first customers are also the ones that really refines your product. And so your choice of first customer will have a huge impact on how your product develops over time. And so depending on sort of how thoughtful you are in finding those right first customers, it can mean that your product can go in pretty different ways. And so I think definitely it's there, your first customers is your marketing, and that's what sort of continues to fuel your distribution engine. But I think we've also found that it really informs where you take your product over going forward as well.
Just quickly, we'll wrap this up. I've absolutely loved this, mate. But how did you get the deal with the banks to give you the money? Like, that seems like that's not easy.
It's not easy. I think there's definitely a little bit of sort of us having done it and seen it before that really helped us in getting it done.
As in you had contacts, or you had...
As in we had contacts, as in we'd been in businesses that had done similar things before.
Right.
And we came with a team and a proposition and a description of what we were going to do that we knew would resonate with them. Because we'd sort of gone through a similar journey before. So I think there's definitely sort of contacts, but there's also sort of the team that we came with, showing that we are experienced, that we know what the hell we're doing, especially when it comes to money and managing other people's money, that there's definitely a trust element. And then also sort of finally knowing practically how we were going to go about it by having seen it before. So I think those three components probably were the things that sort of allowed us to do it.
It's interesting. Again, that goes back to that. There's, I think, a lot of all of this is like just the contacts, but then, are you who you say you are? Have you got the evidence, the social proof?
Yeah.
Final question. What's one truth you believe that most people would disagree with you on?
That's a good question. All right, so what about this one? So I think one thing that I'm quite intrigued about, and there's a lot of talk nowadays about AI and sort of how AI will impact our day-to-day jobs. I think one thing there is this belief that, let me see if I can formulate it well, this belief that the biggest thing with AI is not that it will take your job, but what we believe is that it will help you run your finances and manage the operational side of your business such that you have more time to do your current job. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense. So the narrative is that it's basically the narrative at the minute is that AI is coming to nab everything.
Exactly.
Whereas actually, I suppose what you're saying, it's
take your job.
It's a co-pilot. It's not the pilot.
Yeah, and in particular, it's not gonna take your job. We're gonna deploy it such that you're gonna have more time to spend time on your job. I'm not sure if that flies actually.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
No, I like that.
Something there.
There's something there, and I think it's there's something there because I feel like there's a fear-mongering culture, and again, in terms of survivorship and avoiding black swans, we're always looking out of that whole thing of we're scared by randomness. So the idea of the narrative of like, oh, it's going to come and take your jobs, it makes us feel secure, and actually, I think reframing in context and contrarian views are super important. Mate, I fucking love that. Thank you so much, Henrik. It's an absolute joy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, loved it, man. Thank you so much.
You too.